Now, this is a very unusual story. Although this man wrote some great songs, Beale Street Blues and St. Louis Blues, the two most popular, he was not really a jazz guy. He was a blues man, and more than that, he was a trained musician. But there's a backstory to his journey. You see, he was raised in a place called Florence, Alabama, and kind of backwoodsy. And he was born and raised in a log cabin that had been built by his grandfather. So he humble background. People in his family were very religious. I think his grandfather had been a AME preacher, and his father likewise. And they frowned on anything that was not connected to church. But young William, he had some interest in some things, and the first musical instrument he put his hands on that he liked was a guitar. And he couldn't bring that into the house because the guitar was associated with blues and jazz and that devil music, and that was not allowed in his home. Well, the guitar was discovered by the father, and when he discovered that guitar had to go. But the father thought that the organ was a respectable instrument since it was used in church, so he provided his son with organ lessons, which gave him a musical knowledge of chords and notation and reading and writing music, etc. He didn't stay with the organ lessons very long. He had his mind on something else. He eventually moved to the cornet, which was acceptable because it was used in the school band. And he actually was a very, very smart man. He educated himself. Eventually, as a young man, he took a teaching exam and passed, and was hired to teach at what became Alabama A&M University. He turned the job down because it didn't pay enough money, and took a job as a brick mason, as a carpenter, as whatever, because he was always interested in how much money I'm going to make, what kind of life I'm going to have. Eventually, he did get back to his music and playing in bands. He joined one of the minstrel shows. We talked about those. Traveled around, made a pretty good living at that. After several years of touring and playing and becoming highly respected, he was again approached by Alabama A&M, and this time they offered him enough money that he took the job and taught there for a few years before his philosophies and their philosophies clashed. And he left and returned to the road again, traveling all over the country as pretty much a vaudeville musician, but also spending some time in Mississippi and in the rural South, and learning this music that was being sold, that was being sang in the fields called work songs, and it was being sang in the bars and speakeasies called the blues. And he learned about the flat threes and the flat fives and glistened from one to the other, and he noticed that only in the South did he hear that harmonic melodic shift. Among polite black folks, you never heard that. And so he seized upon this new flavor of sound that we now know as the blues scale, or at least the Dorian mode. He then listened to the call and response that was very similar to what was done in church, and he listed that in his first version of St. Louis Blues. He met a young man who had come out of Atlanta University, who was a great businessman, and together they helped him form a music publishing company, which became very, very successful. He lamented that his music was more popular among whites than among blacks, and his response was, that blacks would prefer to play the music of the day rather than something new. There's probably something to be said for that, but then his music was not as guttural or as improvisational as what was really popular among blacks, whether it be blues or jazz. Nonetheless, he became very successful because he had a very good business plan. One of his big things was to get Bessie Smith to sing his St. Louis Blues. She was a queen of the blues. And then later to get her cast in a movie singing his song. And after that, he became the wealthiest black composer in this country. And so his contribution to jazz is providing a path to financial success and business acumen that was followed later by people like Duke Ellington, who published his own music and kept his own rights and made music from royalties and copyrights and things like that, and the fact that he codified the blues in written form so that everybody could play it, not just the sharecroppers in the backwoods of Mississippi, but housewives in Atlanta or New York or Baltimore or Detroit or wherever. He brought this blues to a wider audience, and he brought it to the general American public, while at the same time showing us the way to be true music merchandisers. W.C. Handy, by the way, he was also a great cornet player. Thank you.